Good day, my dear students, and welcome to our third lecture of our online English classes, jointly organized by International House Toshkent and UZREPORT TV channel. Thank you for this great opportunity. I hope you're safe and sound, and hope you're ready for our third lecture. And today I'm going to talk about the culture, about the organizational culture in particular, and about the national culture. The reason is that national culture and organizational culture, they're interconnected. They have a lot of things in common. If you're ready, let's start. For those who don't know, remember me. Again, let me introduce myself. My name is Vladimir Babayev, and let's get started, I think. Okay, let's start with the definition. What is actually organizational culture? In the screen, you can see some of the definitions made by some of the great people who actually make a research into the culture. And we will start with the first definition of the organizational culture presented by me. So he identifies the organizational culture as the norms, values, rules, climate, and even symbols. If we are looking at the definition of the Trumpinars, he states that organizational culture, this is relationship between employees and organizations. So it can be a system of authority, it can be general views of employees about companies' goals, purposes, and their role. Again, there are a lot of definitions. What is organizational culture? But again, I'm not going to present everything. I'm going to present only some of them interesting to my mind. Okay, let's move forward, and we are going to talk about the organizational culture in more details. When you're talking about the organizational culture, sound organizational culture provides individual members with a sense of identity. Then it provides the source of commitment to a company. Then we can talk about the framework that molds their behavior. And it's usually influenced by factors such as national, head office, it can be location, size, communication system, industries, education, skills, and level of employees. Okay, let's move forward. Okay, every organization has its own culture and no two quite the same. I would like to mention that it's very difficult to change the culture, organizational culture and national culture in particular. I think this is mission impossible, and the best advice for people who are working in international culture and international organizations, you shouldn't change anything in the culture. You can only adapt. If you cannot adapt, usually you will fail. Okay, and again, they are quite different and not the same. Members have to learn its culture. It's very important to learn others' cultures, especially, again, if you work in international organizations, because every organization has its own values, has its own organizational culture. If the top management decides that organizational value must change, usually new beliefs and attitudes are introduced. About the workplace values, they usually passed from experience to new employees. It may or may not be what top management wants. About the national culture, again, I mentioned that national culture and organizational culture, they are interdependent, and I will present the definition of the national culture by the Hofstede. We are going to talk about the Hofstede in more details in a couple of minutes. So Hofstede defines national culture as a collective programming of the mind, which distinguishes the members of one human group from another. I'm just citing. Culture in this sense includes systems of values, and values are among the building blocks of culture. Culture is particular to one group, and the learned passed through generations, includes values and helps predict behavior. So there's actually three questions for you to think over. When you're looking at the first question, are organizational culture values as powerful as national culture? Again, yourself, you can think it over. I strongly recommend you to send the answers directly to my email address. I will show my email address again in the end of the lecture, but it was presented from the very beginning. Again, it's like a home task for you for today. If you have a time, define it again. Even if you don't have a time, again, these 3 questions. Please write to me, what do you think about these 3 questions? Just don't write just simple answers. Please support your arguments with the clear examples. We can actually discuss it even in the email. So it's not a problem, guys. Send your answers because, you know, this is very interesting to those other people's opinion. Again, your opinion may be different from me, but I'm okay with that again. So the first question, are organizational values as powerful as a national culture? Again, you know, some sources say that national culture is more powerful than organizational culture. Maybe you can say that it's somehow different, but again, they're interdependent, like closely connected with each other. What I personally think is that they are quite powerful. I mean, in national culture and organizational culture. Again, you cannot change the organizational culture and you cannot change national culture. You can only adapt. Again, if you're not adapting, usually you're failing. So what's the consequences either way? What do you think? Again, send me please your answers to my email address. So what's actually I was talking about, so Lawrence, he states that organizational culture unlikely can modify natural culture values. Again, I think otherwise. What do you think? Please write to me. And he states when national culture and organizational culture values are in conflict, usually the national culture override the organizational culture. When we're talking about the strong organizational culture, it's very, very important, especially for the productivity of the company. If you have a strong organizational culture, trust me, your productivity is increasing. And why? Because groups where there is a strong organizational culture, usually they're sharing the values, common values, beliefs, and attitudes. Usually, in a strong organizational culture, there is good communication among members and interdependence. Communication within the company, especially where there are different cultures. This is very important, especially about the communication. I think you should find the common ground with other people. If you find the common ground with other people, especially with the foreign culture, trust me, you will be successful. Otherwise, you will have a lot of problems and your productivity will decrease. If your productivity is decreasing, your customers are dissatisfied and you can actually lose the profits, and if you lose the profits, you can lose the business as a result. Interdependence, again, all the members within the organization, they are interdependent, especially when you're talking about even different departments. When you are talking about the advertising departments in the company and the promotion department, a lot of people say that they're quite different. They have different mission because one states that advertising department, they are responsible for the advertisements, or a sales department can be responsible just for sales, but again, they're interdependent. And when they're working together, when they unite, trust me, the result will be incredible. When you're talking about the strong and good relationship within the company, employees, they're working together, they have a common goal. Usually they're sharing this common goal. Again, they have a good communication. Their moral is increasing, they're quite high. And as a result, what I mentioned before, there is actually satisfaction of the customers increasing. Again, it's very important. When you're talking about the in a situation when the relationship are deteriorating within the organization, maybe because of the conflicts, because of the cultural differences. As a result, what is happening? usually different goals. It's divergent in goals. You don't have the common goal. You're not sharing the common goal. There is no trust. There is alienation. And as a result, it can lead to strikes. It can be absenteeism. Absenteeism is, by the way, it's the common problem. And as a result, can be loss of good stuff and even fraudery. Again, we don't trust your colleague. Trust me, you won't have any success. Especially when we're talking about the collectivistic culture. About the collectivistic culture, we will talk in a couple of minutes. So Hofstede, actually I mentioned the person, you actually could see it in the previous slides. So the Hofstede, he made the survey of employees in 50 countries, and he classified each culture in different cultural dimensions. These employees were from the IBM company. And we are going to discuss some of these cultural dimensions of the Hofstede. Very interesting, trust me. So the first cultural dimension is the power distance. So Hofstede defines power distance as a distance between individuals at different levels of the hierarchy. I will explain it in more simple words. Power distance, it's about subordination. It's about the distance between employee and employer. For instance, if we have high power distance and low power distance culture, when you're talking about the high power distance culture, usually the distance between employer and employee is quite high. I mean, there's clear subordination. When you're talking about the low power distance, usually this difference is quite low. The best example can be given, just imagine you are walking in the culture with the high power distance where there's clear subordination, and usually when you're walking in the culture with the high power distance, usually again you can see clear subordination because it's clear the role of the director or CEO and the employee. For instance, just imagine the situation: you are a student and you are studying in the country with the high power distance culture, and you have a respect. I mean, you have a subordination. It's a distance, and distance high between you and between your principal or director. When you're talking about the low power distance culture, for instance, when you're talking, let's say, about the universities or schools in particular, just imagine the situation when your principal, you're a student, and your principal or your rector, for instance, they can invite you for their birthday parties, for instance. Why? Because again, there is no difference. I mean, their relationship is quite close. You cannot imagine the situation in here when you're talking about our culture, because there is clear distance between director and the principal, because you cannot expect that your principal or director can invite you for the birthday party. But when you're talking about the low distance culture, the thing is that your rector or principal can invite you for the party. But why? Because there is no clear distance between you and the principal or director. Individualism versus collectivism. So actually it's the relations between individuals. When you're talking about the collectivistic culture, so usually they are walking together. Relationship between them is very important. They like to do everything together. They're walking in the team. When you're talking about the individualistic culture, usually individual contribution is very important. It's valued. I can say that we have more collectivistic culture. Why? Because we are interconnected. We have a lot of relationship with our relatives. I mean, we are united. Even with our colleagues, we have a lot of celebrations, and we're celebrating everything together, again, with the family members, with the colleagues. Why? Because we are more collectivistic culture. The best example can be given is Hashar, for instance. It's not just the cleaning day. This is what makes us united. Again, we are collecting. We are living in together. About the masculinity, it's the achievements in terms of recognition and wealth. When you're talking about the management procedures, let's say you are working in the culture, in the company where there is a masculine culture. The thing is that when you're talking about the masculine culture and the organization with the masculine culture, so usually they're quite strict. They're more, I think, business-oriented and money-oriented. But when you're talking about the feminine culture, they value close relationship with their employees. I will tell in more details what is masculinity and feminine culture just in a couple of seconds. You will actually understand that. When you're talking about the power distance index, it's found out that Malaysia has the highest power distance, Austria actually the lowest, and I should point out that there is a strong interconnection with the power distance and high power distance and collectivistic culture. When you're talking about the high power distance, it means again, there is clear distance between the employees and employer, and when you're talking about the low power distance, it's more democratic. I will give you an example about the democratic leadership and autocratic leadership. So when you're talking about the autocratic leadership, it means that the boss is always right. It's like we have two universal rules for high power distance culture and for autocratic leadership. Again, you have two rules. The first rule is that boss is always right, and rule number two, if the boss is not right, look at the rule number one. This actually can apply to the high power distance culture and to the autocratic type of leadership. When you're talking about the democratic, again, you have more freedom. Your relationship with the boss is quite close. Again, you even call your boss like by the first name. This is very difficult to imagine close relationship with the boss in high power distance culture. Again, why? Because there is still a clear difference and subordination. When you're talking about about the high power distance culture, the thing is that when you're addressing your boss by the first name, it can be not ethical. It can be treated as a sign of disrespect. Again, about the individualism. Usually it's high means interest in self-respect as a personal achievement. Again, the personal achievements is very important in the individualistic culture. In collectivistic culture, this is common achievement is very important. I mean, when you're doing everything together. What I mentioned before, there is a strong interconnection between high power distance and collectivism. When you're talking about masculinity, again, this is one of the cultural dimensions found out by Hofstede. And when you're talking about masculinity, usually it's about the values like assertiveness, it's about like a self-confidence and money. I mean, this is important point for the masculine culture. And feminine, I mean, your relationship with the boss is very important. A lot of people think that the managers from the feminine culture, they're quite lenient. Yes, maybe I partially agree with that. They're somehow lenient with the employees. Why? Because they do respect and they are focusing on the relationship with the with the employees rather than masculine culture. Because masculine culture, they are oriented only on money, on the productivity. The example can be given when, for instance, you have a boss from the feminine culture, and maybe you have personal problems with your family. Feminine culture and bosses from the feminine culture, they more actually they understand the situation. They say, yeah, okay, if you have any problems with your family, you can stay at home, and even they support you. Why? Because again, relationship is very important for them. When you're talking about the masculine culture and the bosses from the masculine culture, usually they are do not care about the personal problems. Why? Again, because they are again focusing on the results, on the productivity. Usually don't care about the problems you can have at home. Okay, about the high context and low context culture. Actually, it's about the communication. When you're talking about the high context, usually high context culture depends on external environments and situations. When you're talking about the low context culture, its communications have to be explicit, like blunt style, and ambiguity, dislike is more open to change. Okay, I will give you an example about the high context culture. Just imagine you have a negotiation. Like important negotiations with the high context culture. In the high context culture, relationship is very important. When you have some deal to discuss, you're not going straightly to the deal, straight to the business. Usually you're asking them how are they, how's their family. I mean, our culture are more high context because again we value relationship even with our greetings, because when we greet each other, our family members, our friends and relatives and colleagues, usually we're asking some personal questions. Why? Because we do care about them. I mean, for a relationship for us is very important, and usually we're asking questions about the health. We're not just saying hi. We are asking different questions about the, let's say, how's their family, how's their health. Why? Because we are more a high context culture. When you're talking about the low context culture, they are, again, usually communications are explicit again, the blunt style, and when you have negotiations with the organization with the low context culture, usually they don't need this, relationship or they don't expect you to ask how they, what's their family issues. Usually they care again about the business. They straight go to the business, and they don't waste the time on that. About the high context, again, family, friends, and coworkers, they have a close personal relationship. That's what actually I mentioned before. That's again in the high context culture, personal relationship is very, very important. Again, because you are sharing your, in high context culture, you can share your personal problems with your colleagues because they do care and you sharing this information, even again, your personal problems with your colleagues, again, in a high context culture. In the low context culture, again, this is inappropriate. Why? Because in the low context culture, usually, people and employees, they are clearly differentiate your personal life and your business life, because again, business life is a business and your private life is a private life, not mixing it. But in the high context culture, in collectivistic culture, usually again, they can share even their personal problems with their colleagues, and usually colleagues can help them. They're giving some recommendation and advices. Again, you should remember that you should adapt to cultural differences as well as organizational cultures. In the high context culture, very important even tone of voice, even your facial expression, not just your verbal skills, verbal communication is very important. Again, even facial expressions are very important for a form of communication in the high context culture. Okay, let's move forward. So again, we're going to talk about the low context culture in more details. In the low context culture, a relationship is shorter. It's what I was actually mentioned before, and they are valued less personal involvement. In the low context culture, messages must be made explicit. Less dependence on the nonverbal communication like facial expression or even tone of voice. Agreements, they are written rather than spoken. In the high context culture, it is not necessary for you, to write the contract. If you have a deal, you're usually shaking hands. Why? Because you are trusting people. In the low context culture, written agreement is very, very important. And then the last point of the low context, that people, they separating lives into different sectors. Again, they are separating work and personal life. So here you can see the number of countries. This is the examples. You know, I was very surprised that France actually in a high contact culture, despite the fact that the European culture again is in here, together with Italy. High contact culture, more Asian countries are in the high contact culture. In low context culture, England, I think, is understandable. Germany, United States in there. It's about the managerial status. That's what actually I mentioned before. Again, we have different types of leadership. We have, again, autocratic type of leadership and democratic leadership. Autocratic leadership means that boss is always right. You cannot actually question the decisions of the director. Why? Because it's seen as the sign of disrespect. When you're talking about the democratic style leadership, again, you can even argue with your boss. You can say, you know, boss, you're not right in here. And actually, it's welcomed. This is very difficult to imagine the situation in the autocratic leadership, because again, in autocratic type of leadership, boss is always right. Again, if you are disputing with the boss, you're showing sign of disrespect. Again, so you can see actually number of countries with the percentage. You can actually watch it in more detail, in more details at home. I think I shouldn't waste some time on that. About bypassing hierarchy. Again, when talking about the bypassing hierarchy, it's a situation, especially when you have some issues. Usually you are addressing your line manager, for instance. I mean, the person who is one position above you. You're not going straightly to the CEO. Why? Because it's a hierarchy. You shouldn't, you know, step over or miss 2 or 3 positions. Again, if I have some problems, just imagine I'm working in the organization with high power distance. The thing is that, again, there's clear difference and clear distances between employee and employees. And when I have problems, usually I'm addressing my line manager. I mean, the manager, the person who is one position above me. And then this line manager addresses his manager, and then you know, just like a hierarchy. Because, I mean, clear example can be given, like when you're studying, especially in university, when you have some issues with your study, usually you're addressing your head teacher, then you can address, and the head teacher can address dean, and then dean addressing the deputy rector, and then the rector can address with this issue to the rector. As a student, again, you cannot address the rector, I mean, straight to the rector. Why? Because you have other managers, which is actually above you. Or it can be actually a teacher. If you have any problems, again, you're not addressing the rector straight away. You're addressing usually, you know, the head of the department. You're walking in, then the head of the department addressing the dean, and so far and so forth. Again, Sweden has the lowest number. When you're talking about the Sweden employees, they are usually bypassing the hierarchy. If they have some issues, they can go directly to the CEO and deal the issue with the CEO. Let's move forward, I think. About the cultural shock. This is a common problem, especially for the employees, especially for expats who are moving abroad. Usually they have a lot of problems in adaptations. Why? Because different countries have different culture and different values, and it can be a shock for them. And usually it can lead to a sense of isolation, and depression arises. As a result, your productivity is decreasing. I think a lot of you, my dear students, know is like actually cultural shock. Maybe if you are traveling, maybe you can actually see that. Why? Because again, people are different. Okay, customs are different, culture is very different. But again, if you're traveling, let's say to United States or UK, you can actually see some differences. Actually, not some differences, a lot of actual differences in culture. You know, usually there's a cultural shock. This is a psychological disorientation, and you cannot actually rely on the familiar signs regarding relationship. It's very, very important to have a training before moving abroad to work as an expat in a foreign country. Usually you should have a mentor, or you should have someone who can actually provide the necessary training. In here, so the symptoms they are actually evident. Again, there's a tension, frustration, your energy level is decreasing when you have a cultural shock. It's very difficult to make a decision. And again, there's alienation occurs, and alienation leads to feeling of homesickness. Homesickness, I think this is one of the major problems why expat cannot work properly in the foreign country. Why? Because they are still miss their family members. A lot of organizations, they try to invite expats' families as well. Why? Because if they are, if expats, they have family together. They have their own family. They are together. The problem of the homesickness is actually disappearing automatically. Even depression again arises, and even behavior problems as a drinking. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time left. Again, thank you for your attention. It was great to be here today. If you have any questions, you can write directly to me. Please send the answer for 3 questions I actually mentioned before. I wish you best of luck. God bless you and have a nice day.